Hello, everybody. Welcome back to English Champion. On this episode, I'm going to reveal some harsh truths for you. I left off the last episode, which ended up being my most successful podcast ever, so I appreciate those who tuned in. But I concluded that episode with something many people don't really think about or realize, and that is that there are many people in the field of education, and I mean education specifically that field, not just teaching any subject in general. I mean the field of education, that are simply not super smart. All right. These are people who may have advanced degrees. They may seem qualified on paper, but truly they may not be smart enough to hold those positions. And I made the argument just very quickly at the end of the last episode that maybe in the Jason Arday kind of scandal that occurred, it's possible that people weren't just lying about, offering positions to people who weren't qualified to have them, and pretending that everyone is worthy of such elite positions. Maybe they didn't know enough to even tell whether someone was qualified or not. That's kind of how education can be sometimes. And so this is going to be perhaps one of my more controversial episodes. This is going to ruffle some feathers. People are not going to like what I'm going to say. But just remember that I am generalizing here. Okay, I'm not saying every single person falls into this category. I'm not saying this is, certain types of people or certain types of school situations. It's just general, all right? I'm going to tell you generally that people in education are sometimes not always the brightest folks to be doing that kind of work. And too often we kind of assume, well, they're teachers. They must be scholars. They must be really bright. They must be great at explaining things to people. They must have really loved their subject area. That's why they devoted their careers to teaching it. And that is sometimes just not true. There are lots of people in positions of classroom authority or school authority who are simply just not very good at what they do. They aren't smart enough. And again, I'm generalizing, but I'm going to kind of provide some examples here as I go of ways that we kind of know that that's at least partially true. Now, one could say that, well, that happens in every field. There's always a few bad apples. People fail upwards. Some people are maybe not very bright, but they have other skills, and that's what allows them to kind of advance and become somewhat successful. Yeah, I'm not saying that the other industries aren't like this. All I'm going to say is that we often think of education as a different type of field because they're working with kids, they're working with ideas, they're working with supposedly like scientific or research methodologies. They're pursuing things that are higher than just a paycheck usually, or at least supposedly. That's what we think. And yet I'm just going to lay out how that's just not always true. And there are lots of problems. And until we start recognizing the problems with the teachers, I don't know how many of these things get fixed. I've also said that it's not just the teachers. I'm going to reference that again here in a minute. But yes, there are a million problems with education. I've said on many episodes before, I've written many articles about it. It's a combination of the kids themselves, a combination of the teachers, a combination of the parents, it's a combination of administrators. There's a technology problem. There's kind of the business model of education problem. There's all sorts of problems. So I'm not saying that this is the only problem, and if we fix this, then everything else will fall into place. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying this is something that many people don't think about. It's very easy to point the fingers at the kids, and oftentimes we should. It's also very easy to point fingers at parents, and we should. But sometimes teachers aren't scrutinized very closely because, again, we assume that they're doing things with the best intentions. They're where they believe they were destined to be because they have a passion for this or something, and they deserve as much scrutiny as anybody. And so I'm just going to talk about that for a little bit here today. And then at the end, I'm going to offer some potential solutions because the Arday case, as I talked about last episode, his dissertation was about teacher training. I'm going to offer a few pieces of advice regarding teacher training and how we might be able to work on improving this and reducing the number of people like Arday or millions of other teachers around the world who kind of slide into the educational system without actually being very qualified for it. So that's what I'm going to offer by the end. I always tell my students, don't just complain about stuff, offer solutions. So I'm going to offer a few solutions at the end as well. So the thing we have to first recognize is that there is data on this. Okay, this isn't just me using anecdotes, which I will offer plenty here as I go. But there is data on this. When we look at GRE scores, I've mentioned this on other episodes, but let me just show this to you. Um, Here's the website Best Colleges with the most recent data I was able to find from just 2 years ago. So here's the average scores in various fields for when people go into graduate school. All right. As you can see, most of them are above the 150 mark. All right, in scoring. I don't know how this correlates because I took my GREs so many years ago that it was still on the 1600 scale. So the new scaling, I'm not sure how that correlates to the old scale, but as you can see, they're all pretty much well above 150. My field, humanities and arts, the column on the left there is the verbal stuff. The column in the middle is the math, and the column on the right is the writing. And as you can see in my field, we prioritize the language and how well you read, and then how well you write. So those are the two highest. We don't really care about how well you do with math, and so that's our lowest, which makes sense. Same thing in engineering. It's the opposite. They don't necessarily care much about the verbal stuff, but the math part is very high. So each field has its own emphasis, but generally speaking, as you can see, they all tend to be above the 150 line. All right, that's sort of kind of the minimum for all these. When we look at where education falls, however, because that wasn't in the last chart, but here's where we see on the verbal, quantitative, and writing score as well. Again, they're all about 150, but as you can see, education is the lowest. It has a low verbal score, and it also has a low quantitative score. So out of the general fields in which you go in to get your master's and PhDs, education is the lowest. All right, that's just the reality of it. This is the scores that schools accept, and it's also the scores that the test takers produce. So it's kind of both sides. It's not like, well, the students who take it are actually really bright. It's just the schools have a pretty low bar for admission, and it's not just, well, the schools have a high bar for admission and these students just can't cut it. No, they're both low. The student taking the test is performing at a low level, and the admissions into the school are also low. All right. So this sort of education for master's and doctoral level work is kind of like how college has become across the board for bachelor's degrees, where it's like, yeah, you don't have to have a high SAT score. You don't have to have a high GPA in high school, because any school will take pretty much anybody. If you're going to just an average university, yeah, you'll get in because it's easy. Well, should education at the highest level, which is people pursuing their masters and doctorates, should that be easy? Well, according to the data, it is. So that's a problem. When we allow in to our top graduate programs students who clearly don't perform very well, they're not high quality readers and writers, and they aren't great at the quantitative stuff either, well, that's a big problem because these are people that we're assuming are going to be leading our children, the youth of America, helping make them intelligent citizens. And they themselves are at the low end of our intelligent citizens. So that's weird. We shouldn't be accepting that. The people who go into teaching should have very high scores, at least comparable to the other humanities and kind of not overly technical fields. So when we look at education specifically, the breakdown within education, people who go into these for their master's programs, notice which one is the highest. Well, secondary education is the highest because, like the other fields, you kind of would assume, well, you probably have to be good in something else besides just the education stuff, history, math, whatever, English. And so the secondary ed is the highest scores. But look at how low everything else is. Elementary ed, low. Curriculum and instruction, low. Evaluation and research, low. They're barely at the 150 mark, if that. And what's the lowest of all of these, aside from the counseling and personnel services and special ed programs? Administration. Exactly. The people who go into administration are oftentimes the least intelligent of all of them. How is this happening? So when you look at the education field itself, not even just compared to the other fields, yeah, they have lower scores than engineering. They have lower scores than English and philosophy, things like that. But even within education, we can see the breakdown of well, who are actually probably the brightest people in education? Well, secondary teachers, because they have to know other stuff. Who are the worst? Administrators. That's where we're at. So it's not good how we're letting people become educators when, according to other fields, They just aren't up to par, and yet we're putting them in charge of educating our students. It's very strange. I When I was in my doctoral program, I met a guy who we sometimes sat near each other in class, and so during breaks we would just chit chat. And he was a nice guy, and he told me, he was like, "Well, yeah, my we were talking about our backgrounds, and I'd been a teacher already for a long time, and his his undergrad degree was in astrophysics, and yet he'd gotten his master's in English, now was in his PhD for English, and so he was kind of on like the Charles Van Doren path. Like, here was this guy who knew the hardest science stuff ever, but he was also switching his interests into the arts, into English. And so he's a very interesting young guy. And we were talking about some of the problems with teaching, because he had done some teaching as well. And he said, when I was in my undergrad, he goes, the first year or two, we'd have the same like cohort. Like, you kind of saw the same students. You're all taking the same classes in those science classes. He said, by my junior and senior year, the people who were in my classes would disappear. I never saw them, and they weren't in my astrophysics program anymore. And so then I would see him in the cafeteria, or I'd see him walking across campus, and I'd be like, "Hey, haven't seen you in a while. Like, what happened? I thought you were in this program with me." And he goes, "You know where they went? Yeah, they transferred into the teaching science program. Why? Because the astrophysics stuff, the actual science, was too difficult. They thought they wanted to do it, but they realized, oh, I'm not smart enough for this. But they wanted to stay in science, and so they went into the teaching of science." So he and I would just laugh about it, like, yeah, these are the people becoming teachers. The people who become teachers have flunked, some of them, not all of them, obviously, have kind of flunked out of the actual field that they thought they wanted to go into. Well, is that who we want to become teachers? We should want experts, or at least something close to experts in those fields. And yet we don't. We get people who are dropouts from other fields. It's just not good. I read an article recently that was quite interesting. Had some good points in it, and this lady was arguing. The title was like, "Don't blame teachers," and she was basically arguing that there has been a lot of um, kind of bad teacher preparation. Like, the schools that are supposed to be churning out teachers haven't taught them properly, and so when we see low test scores, we see kids not doing well. Um, the kind of thought would be, well, the teachers are doing a bad job. And she says, nah, it may not be the teacher's fault. They don't know some of the proper teaching because their own program didn't teach them properly. And I thought, well, okay, and I'm going to talk about how that might be true here in a second. But we also have to remember, just like the example with the astrophysics, like, well, maybe they did try to teach them and they weren't smart enough. And so they had to, they still passed, but just aren't very good at it, or they left teaching altogether, or whatever. Maybe they were taught. I said in the last episode, the old joke about, well, what do you call a guy who gets a C in med school? Well, you call him a doctor. Well, the same thing happens in education. What do you call a guy or a lady who gets C's in her education program? She's a teacher, or a professor, or a dean, worse yet, or vice president of something. Like, yeah, they all just get passed along. So, were they taught those things? Yeah, maybe they just didn't learn them very well. Now, I will agree with her here and say maybe they weren't, because as I started with, maybe the people running these programs aren't actually very bright. Again, according to their GRE scores, these are the people who are the heads of these departments at these universities. And it's possible they just aren't very smart. So I follow a lot of people online who, because I'm in education and I write stuff, people pop into my feed and I kind of see their background and see their ideas and all this stuff. And it's often very interesting. And to this lady's point in her article about don't blame teachers, there are many teachers who kind of reveal themselves in the online world, and I immediately go, "Oh, you're not good at this. You're just now starting to become good at this, but you were bad at this for a very long time." Case in point, there's one gentleman who pops into my feed, and he's constantly talking about the science of learning, and he's all about it. He uses all the big language and retrieval and all this stuff about cognitive science and all that. And that's all great. What he's saying is true for the most part. He also has lots of bad ideas, but generally speaking, he's on the right track. However, what's also been revealed, I've heard him say in podcasts, and I've seen him write it, that he's been a teacher for 18 years, but only in the last 2 or 3 has he learned so much about cognitive science and the science of learning and all this stuff. I'm like, oh, really? You're just now getting to this? Oh, what were you doing the previous 15 years? Well, like I've just been saying, clearly not super qualified at this. Probably not teaching his class properly. Well, how did he get to this place? Well, it's because the whole system doesn't have enough rigor in it, and people can slide by without having to know real stuff. And so I'm glad this guy is now coming around to learning what real teaching is like. Well, that's great. Again, many of his ideas are still not very good and very practical, but he's using the proper methodologies now, at least from a scientific perspective. But again, he's kind of openly admitting, oh yeah, I didn't know anything for 15 years. Well, how many kids did he teach over that time that had bad instruction? He may be a very nice guy. Like he's showing that he's starting to become smarter, but again, you admitted for 15 years you didn't know what you were doing. So how much should I be trusting you now? Again, I'm glad you've finally come around, but it doesn't put a lot of confidence. And of course, people below in the comments are always like, "Oh, so smart. Such a great idea for your class. I want to use this too." It's like, yeah, smart people have been doing this for 50 years. We've all already known this. So how did this guy become a teacher when he didn't know this? It's very strange. I saw another lady recently, in her title, her label, her profile, it says NBCT, National Board Certified Teacher. And yet, in one of her posts, she says, "Oh, I was a teacher for 6 or 7 years, and then she's been a principal for like 20 years." And she's like, "Oh, I never actually learned the science of reading and how kids actually learn to read." I think she was like a 6th grade teacher or something. And so she was like, "Well, I just assumed kids already knew how to read because they were in 6th grade." It's like, so we put someone in a position to be an elementary school teacher or middle school teacher with no experience or background in teaching reading. Like, we're just assuming every kid is already a great reader. That's ridiculous. Everyone should be taught about how the brain works when it's reading, and how there's good pedagogy for teaching reading, whether you're a kindergarten teacher, 7th grade teacher, college teacher, whatever it is. Everyone should have that background. And so she's sort of agreeing with that other person's article about, well, maybe they weren't taught. Yeah, she wasn't, and yet she was a teacher for a long time, and then moved on to become a principal. So again, this is like a double whammy here. All right. First of all, it was bad enough that we have people who are teachers that don't know anything about reading. That's a problem. And then they get moved to being principals, who now make a bunch of money for some reason, and who oversee other teachers who also don't know about reading. Like, you've made it to that level without knowing about a basic function of teaching. This is where we are in education. And she's, again, I'm glad, like the last guy, she's come around. She's like, now that I'm learning all this stuff about the science of reading, I'm going to start teaching this to my teachers so that I can make sure they're using this in the classroom. It's like, oh, that's good. I'm glad you finally came around to it. Now that you're, in your late 50s and you've been doing this for 30 years, like, better late than never. But I mean, what were you doing in the meantime? What is going on at schools that we allow people to become educators who don't know how to educate? It's very strange. The article I just referenced, she says, and this is kind of a good point. She says, the real question is whether we've equipped teachers with the knowledge they need. Increasingly, I don't believe we have. Again, maybe they have, and people just weren't smart enough to listen, but let's just go along with her for a minute. For years, we've demanded that teachers undertake more professional learning, buy another course, attend another conference, read another book, watch another webinar. Think about how extraordinary that is. Imagine qualifying as a mechanic and then discovering that nobody had actually taught you how engines work, or graduating as a physiotherapist only to realize you never learned anatomy. We would never accept that. Yeah, exactly right. How are these people becoming teachers when they don't know stuff either about teaching or about their content area that they're supposed to be teaching? Yet we routinely accept teachers graduating without a deep understanding of language, reading and writing, etc. Then we wonder why they're desperately searching for answers 5, 10, or 20 years into their career. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's so weird that we allow this in education, which is such an influential field. I'm not saying other fields aren't as important. Obviously they are. But from like the ripple effect that teaching has on the culture, if you're an auto mechanic, okay, look, I can't do that stuff. I'm glad people do it. I'm glad they're trained in that field. But it's not like that has broad cultural effects. If you can fix one person's car, great. You helped that one person get to work the next day. That's awesome. But like, you're not affecting people for generations. Well, education affects kids year after year. It affects their job prospects in life. It affects how they raise a family someday. It affects how they become a citizen. It has wide reaching, generational, culture wide effects. And yet, like she just said, we're churning out teachers who aren't good at this. We would never accept that in any other field, yet somehow it's okay in teaching. So strange. I'll get to why we maybe do that towards the end. Um, Not to keep piling on people, but just as further examples, I wish I had a screenshot it. I'm sorry I didn't, but I saw a lady's post just the other day about how difficult it is and how much prep time she needs teaching math. I think she said she was a fourth grade teacher. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was fifth, fourth, fifth, something like that. And I was just like, wait, what? You struggle in prepping to teach fourth grade math. You're an adult with a degree in education, and you're struggling with the math. It's just so strange. I used to teach fifth grade, and many many years ago, and I never had to prep to teach fifth grade. I mean, it, it's it's not hard. Any person with any level of education, much less a degree from a university, anyone who went through high school should know how to do basic math. So in fifth grade, it was fractions, decimals, long multiplication and division, um, the beginnings of probability and statistics, like ratios and stuff like that, um, beginning of geometry, integers, positives, negatives. Yeah, it's like basic stuff that any human should know how to do. I didn't have to go home and study to teach fifth grade math. And yet this lady was posting about, oh, the number of hours I had to spend in reviewing the math and getting ready for lessons and how to, like, what? I mean, it's shocking that, first of all, that happens. And secondly, that people admit that it happens. It's crazy. Like the guy who said, oh, I just learned about this 2 years ago and he's been doing this for 18 years. What? Why would you admit that? That's insane. Um, Again, to this lack of qualification, my mom to this day talks about one of my brother's elementary school teachers. I can't remember what grade it was, early years. So like first, second, third grade, somewhere in there. To this day, she will still talk about it. How my brother's teacher sent home a letter. I don't know, it was at the beginning of the year or something like that to the parents. Talking about like, here's what we're going to do in the class, and here's some plans, and here's what we're going to try to accomplish, or whatever kind of welcome letter or something. And my mom goes, it was riddled with grammatical mistakes, spelling mistakes, that any person with, again, any level of competency with the English language should have been able to do. And yet, this was my son's teacher. And she always jokes, she said, it took all of my strength to not, in red ink, circle all of the errors in that and walk it into her classroom and hand it back to her and say, do not send me another letter. Do not send letters to parents that look like this. She goes, she didn't do that, but she's like, from that moment on, I never trusted that lady to be my son's teacher. And yet she was very nice. But, my brother was stuck with that teacher who didn't know the basics of how to write and how to use proper sentence structure. Like that's what we're dealing with. Like these people are everywhere. Again, I'm generalizing. I'm not saying it's every single person, that everyone's a dummy who's a teacher. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there are more of these people than anyone realizes. Just to go back to the people leading these departments. Again, nice people, and I respected some of these people for a variety of reasons. However, way too many times when I was a college professor, I would be in faculty meetings, or there'd be some committee or some project we teachers had to work on for the school or something. And I'd be there with education professors, and they would openly say, oh, I'm so bad at writing. Oh, it's a good thing Matt's here. The English department's here because we're going to need some help with writing. I'm so bad at grammar. It's just so weird. It's something I just struggle with. I'm just so bad at it. Like they kind of made light of it. And I always thought, wow, you're leading a department or you're teaching classes in how to train people to become good teachers. And you yourself are admitting you don't know how to write. You don't know good grammar. And we would all kind of just laugh it off, but that wouldn't happen with any other field. If there was something that was specifically related to your field, it's like, okay, yeah, let the history department deal with that. Let the biology department deal with that. But this wasn't that. This wasn't like, oh, some esoteric literary texts. No, this is just reading and writing. This is basic, like, here's a form I got to fill out. Oh, we better have the English department check it over. No, that's insane. And yet that happened many times during my many years at the college level from people in education departments. And again, I'm not saying other people don't struggle with grammar and writing as well, but it's weird that the education people were so forthright about it. And yet they're the ones supposedly teaching our kids how to read and write. It's very strange. Um, I I'm convinced that I've missed my calling, I guess, because what I do is I try to present things that are somewhat new, somewhat creative. I have ideas that I think are different than most people, and that's what I put out in the world. The articles I write, the curriculum materials I create, the podcasts I do. I'm always trying to do something that is unique and that other people aren't talking about, or teaching things in ways that other teachers don't do. I want my stuff to be unique, to be creative. And yet, I'm convinced that in the online world, the way to become successful is to just repeat things that other smart people have already been doing forever. It's so weird how the most successful people in a variety of kind of like content areas mostly all just say things that everyone should already know, or at least smart people already know. And education is the same. So it's like in you see like nutrition influencers. They're talking about like the most basic stuff. Oh, you really need to cut out sugar. Oh, no kidding. Yeah, everyone knows that. And yeah, oh, million followers on whatever platform. Fitness people like you got to do this kinds of exercises to get in shape. Oh, the same exercises people have been doing for 200 years. Okay, got it. Yeah, we all know that. Um, money management. Like, oh, here's how you got to make sure to not overspend on XYZ because debt is really bad. And yeah, no kidding. Any intelligent person already knows all this. Like, what are you telling me here? What is new about this? Mental health. You need to take a break from the screens, and you need to make sure you're meeting with friends and getting fresh air. Like, yeah, you mean like living like a normal person has always lived. Yeah, that's it's probably the best thing for your mental health. Yeah, we know that. So these are people who are very successful. And again, education is no different. It's stunning how many people I see write articles, especially now in this science of learning kind of space, who like you're just saying things that other smart teachers have been doing for 60 years. Like where's your new ideas here? Maybe there aren't any, and I'll touch on that here in a second, but it's just so strange that in the world of education, um, it's either people coming up with ideas that are just horrifically bad, like they're trying to be creative and smart and it's just a dumb idea, or yeah, you're just repeating things that everyone has already known forever. And it's just very strange. And so I was reading an article this past week about curriculum, and a guy who has thousands and thousands of followers, and everyone like fawns over how smart he is. And every article he writes is like, yeah, ordinary good teachers have already known this. What is this that's new? What are you saying? This isn't brand new information. And he's big in the science of learning and talks about cognition and all this stuff. It's like, yeah, all that stuff's right. We all knew that 40 years ago. So what are you telling me? So you had an article this week or a week or two ago about curriculum. And basically he was saying that, one reason that the science of learning stuff is difficult to apply is because most curriculum isn't designed for it. And so you have teachers who are just now learning the science of learning stuff, trying to like uh, attach it to this curriculum that was never designed for it. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense to me, because any good teacher should already constantly be inventing curriculum themselves. All right. Again, maybe I'm the weirdo. Maybe I just have always done this. And maybe, like I've said from the top, there are teachers who are just so not intelligent that they literally just show up at their job and go, okay, what textbook should I use? Oh, this one. Thank you, principal. And they open it up and just start reading from the textbook and think they're teaching. Like I never in my 25 years, elementary, working with high school students, being a department chair at a university, any level where I've taught thousands and thousands of students, never once have I ever thought, oh, well, the textbook is going to tell me how to teach this class. It's always been, here's a text. It's up to me to figure out how to teach it. And because I already knew about all this stuff, I didn't need some, influencer online to tell me this. Like, yeah, this is basic teaching stuff. I always built my own curriculum. Whether it was starting from scratch and being like, there is no textbook that I want to use. I'm going to build my own resources here, and I'm going to order them in a certain way, and I'm going to do certain assessments that reflect the sequencing of that and what I want kids to be focused on. And I'm going to omit this, but I'm going to include this because this is more important. I've always shaped it. Or if I am in a class where I'm using a certain textbook, never do I go like in order. I always like jump around. I'll use this activity or these questions, but I won't use that because I'll come up with my own that are better than the ones the textbook has. I've always done that. So, like, just an example, this is a textbook I used to teach American Lit for many years. I'm not saying it's the best one. It's just a Norton anthology. It's the shorter one so that I could save students money by just teaching 2 semesters worth with one book. So they took me for part 2 of the class. They didn't have to buy a brand new textbook. This book is enormous. It's thousands of pages long. Okay. You could never teach this book in one semester. You can't teach it in 1 year. You probably couldn't teach it in several years. So why did I choose it? And how did I possibly teach the class if there wasn't a curriculum built for me with the science of learning attached to it? It's like, well, I already knew it. I already know how to teach this. And so what I would do is I would read through the pieces and decide, well, this one's better than this one. This one's more important. Here's kind of the arc I want to take the students on. I want to start the class here and I want to end it here. And so I need to make sure that there's a connection among all the things and that they refer back to one another and that they give hints as to where this is going, and they provide opportunities for individual analysis, but also reflection back on other things we've talked about. Like, yeah, I built that every single year I've ever been a college professor, and that's what every college professor does. I mean, again, I don't know any college professor who just opens a textbook and just starts regurgitating what the text says. Everyone, at least anyone who's good, has to shape it according to what they want to accomplish in the class, but also what the kids need. Maybe kids don't need certain things. Maybe they're not ready for certain things, and that's something that needs to be covered in a future semester. Maybe they're already way past it. So it's like, this is in the textbook, but I don't need to cover this. My kids are already ahead of that. Let's jump to this next thing. It's always an adjustment. So even when I taught elementary school and we did have textbooks and stuff like that, like I was always just teaching my own stuff. I never taught history directly right through with the way the textbook laid out. So when this guy is writing about, oh, well, we need better curriculum that incorporates the science of learning, it's like, maybe, okay, well, one, step up to the plate then and write a textbook about a content area, not about education, about an actual content area, because that's where he says the problems are. If you're teaching history and it doesn't incorporate the science of learning into the history curriculum, okay, well, write a history book then. If you're so good at this, write a history book, write a biology book, write an English book, whatever. But like pointing at the curriculum companies and going, you're not doing this right. I'm like, okay, well, good luck with that. I mean, curriculum companies are beholden to like 10 different entities. The fact they're going to listen to you, again, you'd be better off just creating it yourself since you're so smart. But again, that's what all of us have always done. I've always built my own curriculum, especially, in my novel class. Like there's no textbook for the novel. I pulled 8 novels and built a curriculum out of 8 individual books, and then made a through line through them and taught certain thematic ideas and connected them historically and chronologically and all that stuff. Like, yeah, you build it yourself. In my writing classes, even when I have used a writing textbook over the years, again, I jump around all over the place. I create my own activities if the activity in the book isn't really that good, or if I think it's not incorporating enough kind of cognitive stuff that I need the kids to grapple with. Yeah, I always do that. So whether you create your own or you actually do use a textbook and you reinvent it according to this science of learning, or what you believe to be proper kind of scope and sequence kinds of stuff. Yeah, that's what smart people have always done. Who isn't doing that? Apparently, lots of teachers who weren't smart enough to do it. Why weren't they smart enough? Well, maybe they didn't know enough pedagogical methods. That's very possible. Or they didn't know their content area very well. That's also very possible. Whatever it is, they aren't smart enough, because anyone who's smart has no concern with this. I never expected any textbook that I would either have handed to me by a principal or something, or that I would choose to be perfect in every way. I always went in going, well, this covers enough of what I want covered, but I'm always going to readjust it to the needs of my students or to the needs of what I want to teach and what I feel is most important to teach. So it's just so strange, again, that people write these articles. And again, I'm not saying he's necessarily wrong that the curriculum doesn't influence the pedagogy. Well, of course it does. But good teachers who've been doing this forever, we we already know how to do that. And it's not a problem. So when we say, well, it's a big problem that the teachers aren't doing a good job because it's the curriculum, like, well, no, good teachers get around that and have been getting around it forever. And in fact, that's what you do at the college level, especially in English. I can't speak to, biology or something like that, or math. I don't know how they teach. So that's up to them. That's their field. But in English, I've never used at the college level, I've never used a textbook that I was like, oh, this is perfect. This has everything that needs to happen from a science of learning, a science of writing, a science of reading standpoint. No, it's always just, here are some materials I think are interesting. Let me build the cognitive stuff around that. Because why? Because I'm smart enough to do that, as all teachers should be. I'm not special. Like, those of us who are good teachers, we can do this. But apparently, you get a lot of views by catering to people who don't know what they're doing and who just now are discovering, oh, you mean I can adjust the curriculum and I can write my own lessons and I can create a course for myself without having to use a tech. Yeah, you you not only can you do that, you should be doing that. And if you haven't been, you're kind of exposing yourself that that you aren't a great teacher and that maybe you're not smart enough to be doing this job. The irony of that from a curriculum standpoint is that, again, the science of learning people are always about friction. And it's like, we need to create more friction for students. We need to create where the kids butt up against difficult concepts and have to remember things from previous lessons and constantly challenge and adapt themselves and all that stuff. It's like, okay, fair enough. That is true. And yet when it comes to teaching, it's like, well, I don't want any friction. I want the curriculum to just tell me what to do. I shouldn't have to actually struggle with how I present this to students and writing my own kinds of lessons and creating my own activities and assessments and employing my own methods for, their cognitive retrieval and all that kind of stuff. No, I should have the textbook. Just write it all out for me and I'll just read it and apply it in my classrooms. And ta-da, I'm a good teacher now. It's like, oh, so you don't actually care about friction. Okay. Because friction is supposed to make you smarter, right? Because that's what we tell our students. And yet when it comes to the teaching, no, we should let the curriculum company needs to rewrite their textbooks so that the teachers don't have to work so hard. So that they don't have to relearn fourth grade math. So that they can teach their science of reading better. Yeah, these are the teachers we have, okay, who need things handed to them on a platter because they aren't smart enough to come up with their own stuff because they don't know their field well enough. That's what we have. So, like I said at the top, this isn't just education. Every field has its problems with this. I, for a long time, have had the idea of kind of a cumbersome rule of thumb, but it's kind of like the 5, 15, 75, 5 rule. And it kind of fits along with like a grading scale, pretty much, where 5% of the people in pretty much any industry, no matter what it is, but it's especially true for education, are great. They're on it. They're smart. They're the most productive. They're the most creative. They get the most done. They get the best results. They're the superstars. 5% are really, really good at their job. All right. Just like in a classroom, maybe 5% are really, really bright. It's about it. On a sports team, it's about 5% of the athletes on your team are really, really good. 15% are serviceable. 15% of teachers, they're okay. They try. They do pretty good work, but they are definitely not your superstar teachers. All right. Again, just like in any other field, 15% of people do a decent job. All right. 75%, this is my theory, 75% of people in any job, in any field, are really inconsequential. They could be replaced tomorrow. No one would care. They don't necessarily contribute very much. These are people who show up. Hopefully they show up on time. That's not always guaranteed. They kind of do the minimum and they get out and they don't think about that work until the next time they have to show up. All right. The work means nothing to them. It's just a paycheck. And so they slide by. These are, again, these would be like in sports, the people who are kind of just are on the end of the bench. Like if they got traded from the team or cut from the team, like it wouldn't matter. The team functions fine without them, but they are on the team. They do the minimum. They go through the drills. They're there. It's fine, but they're not really contributing very much. These are in classrooms. These are like D students. They might be there, but they're not making that class better, and they're barely participating. All right. And then there's 5% who are either so catastrophically bad at it that um, they're ruining that field. They're ruining teaching by just being really bad, or they're actively harming it. They're doing things that are kind of purposefully sabotaging that field. Um, Again, these are if you're a coach, this is 5% might be the guys who are the bad locker room guys. They're the ones who are always starting fights. They're the ones causing dissension. They complain about everything. Like, they're harming the culture of the team, and they should be cut from the team. If you work at a bank, these are people who are so bad at the finance stuff that their like money disappears. Accounts are inaccurate. Like, you're losing money here. This is a problem. Or they're stealing from the bank. Like, you're sabotaging this business. Same goes in education. They're either so bad that the students get worse by just being around them, or they could be actively sabotaging. Like, they're doing things harmfully to the students in that environment, like purposefully teaching them badly, you know, um, treating students badly, whatever. Like, they're just the worst of the worst. They're failing at that job. And so we have to just understand that teaching is the same as any other industry. There are only a few people who are really good at this. There are some people who are okay. They pass. There are some people who do the bare minimum and don't care about this at all. And there are some people who are truly, truly detrimental to the entire industry. And again, in some industries, it may not make that much of a difference. You can be bad and it doesn't necessarily really harm that many people. Maybe it just harms your specific branch of your company. All right. Maybe it harms one other coworker. Okay. That's not good, but it's certainly not catastrophic. Education can be catastrophic. For what I said earlier, it spans generations. It spans throughout the culture. It changes people's lives. And if we're having people do it who are bad at it, there are major consequences. And we've been seeing some of those in the last, 20 years, where things have gotten especially bad. So until we address that, until we start trying to find that special 5%, I don't know how this improves. Something that I always think about too with some of these new teaching ideas, when everyone thinks they've got the next big idea, we put men on the moon. All right, we became the world superpower in industry, in liberty. America has been the best country in the world for many, many, many years now. How did that happen if all of our teaching methods were so wrong? If we were all so backwards back then? How is that possible? Well, maybe it's because the way we used to do things wasn't so backwards. Maybe the way we did things, where teachers designed their own curriculum because they were pretty good, they were pretty smart, where teachers had authority in a classroom, where you know, uh, education was more of a respected profession than it is now. Maybe the old way was better. And so when we try to do the new trendy things and everything's flashy and, we got to incorporate all these new pedagogies or new technologies or whatever it is because, things are different now. It's like, no, they're not. They're still kids. We just got to teach them. We still have brains that require, comprehension and memory and acquisition of various skills, all of that stuff. It's the same. We just think it's different. And if we would just get back to the old ways of doing things, maybe you wouldn't have as many subscribers to your Substack, but just recognize that, hey, the way we used to do stuff was actually pretty good. Let's get back to basics. High rigor, high standards. If you do poorly, you can't spell and you can't do math, well, you're going to flunk. That's just the way it is. We're not passing people along who make excuses, which is what I talked about last time. Like, why are we passing people along and getting degrees who are unqualified for these fields? Well, maybe we should stop doing that. Let's get back to standards and rigor, and maybe things would be a bit better. Solutions. All right. So I've complained a lot about the state of teaching, but I think there are a couple ideas that we could try or experiment with. From a student teaching standpoint, like, how do we prepare these people to become better teachers? First, I think everyone, and this does happen already to a certain degree, but I think everyone should spend at least a little time teaching first graders. Right? You think, oh, I want to be a high school biology teacher. Okay. Spend a week, a month, whatever it is, teaching first grade. You want to be a college teacher, go teach first grade. There is, as an elementary teacher when I started, I always point back to that where even though I taught fifth grade, during my teacher prep stuff, I had to go teach first grade. You had to go teach all the grades. But I remember vividly thinking back then, um, I was like, wow, teaching first grade really forces you to clarify your own thoughts, to put yourself in the mind of a 6 year old and think, okay, how are they viewing the world? What are they trying to wrap their brains around? What would make a good connection for them? Because I just talked to them about this, but now I need them to learn this new thing. So how do I bridge that gap for them with their little 6 year old mind? Practice with that is so valuable that I think about that even as a college professor, where I think, it's a good thing I had to teach little kids who didn't know anything. Because guess what? There's big kids who don't know anything either. And you have to um, not dumb it down, but you have to simplify and streamline things for many students. And that if you don't have any practice with that and you just assume, like the lady who's the national board certified teacher, like, well, I just assumed they were already good at this because they're here in my class. Like, no, that's not how it is. You need to know everything. You need to know first grade through senior of high school. You need to know how to teach all of it. And starting at the beginning is the best practice for that. It doesn't have to be a long time. Again, you need to spend time prepping for what you're actually going to do. But it is invaluable. I'm telling you, force people to go teach first grade for a while, and it's a very valuable teaching experience. Second idea for teacher training. I've mentioned this very briefly before, but I believe in pedagogy classes, your methods classes. I would really love to see experiments where you have students, yes, spend 50% of the time working on preparation for the lessons they're actually going to teach. Okay. So you want to be a middle school English teacher? Great. Okay. Yes, we need to practice what it's like teaching to middle school students because that's what you're going to do. So we need to become good at that. And we need to plan and we need to write lessons and develop curriculum and practice some different pedagogies for that age group and all that stuff. That is all great, but I think it should be 50% of the time. The other 50% of the time should be spent during teacher training, forcing these brand new teachers to teach things completely off the top of their heads, to throw away the lesson plan and say, here's this, teach it to me, go. So an example would be like, let's say a kid's preparing to be an English teacher, okay? And I'm the professor of that class. I would go, hey, so you read Hamlet in high school, right? And they go, oh yeah, of course. Or you read Hamlet. I know the literature professor. I know he had you read Hamlet last semester. You remember having that class? You read it? Yeah, I remember, of course. I go, you have to teach Hamlet in 5 minutes. Go. You have 5 minutes to think about what you want to do. Go. We'll be waiting. We're your high school class for the day. Teach us. You have 5 minutes to prepare. And on the fly, they got to come up with how to do a 30-minute lesson on Hamlet. All right. Or if it's elementary school, their lesson plan, practice plan for that day was they're going to teach fractions or something. And so they show up and they're like, okay, we're going to do fractions. And the professor goes, no, hold on a second. In fact, today, I want you to teach, you're going to teach long division today to third graders. So scrap your fraction plan for fifth grade. You're going to teach third grade long division. Go. We're sitting here waiting. Teach it to us. Like, put people on the spot. Because you know who can do stuff on the spot? Smart people. You know who can't? Not smart people. If you can't teach something that you should already know about, it's not like we're asking them to do something they've never ever learned about. But if you've learned this thing, you've read that book, you know your fractions, all that stuff. And even though you haven't been preparing for it, if you can still teach that thing, well, you're probably pretty bright. And the reason we can tell you're bright is because, one, you've retained the information from when you learned it yourself. But also, you can think on the fly and you can do things quickly. The measure of intelligence is how fast you can do stuff. How fast can you process? How fast can you pull from memory to be something usable? That's intelligence. So if you can't do that, if you don't remember what you already learned and you don't know how to apply it to this situation, well, you're probably not going to be a very great teacher. So this is something that should be happening in teacher ed programs everywhere. Is yes, you work on the planning stuff. They need to practice those things, of course. But there should also be spur of the moment, on the fly, completely extemporaneous um, practice, because that is what happens in classrooms. You thought you were going to teach this one day. Something happens where you can't do that now. Maybe you were gonna have them do something on paper and the printer broke. Now you don't have it. What are you going to do? Um, you were going to teach some math concept and you realize after the first 2 minutes that your kids didn't remember what you just taught them yesterday. Okay, well, you can't go on to the next thing until you go back and rehash some things from the previous lesson and maybe redo the whole lesson all over again in a completely different way, which is what I've done many times, where I taught something, I thought it might have gone okay, come back the next week, they've completely forgotten all of it. It did not stick at all. And it could have been that maybe I didn't explain it right. It could have been they didn't do the studying that I told them to do, but for whatever reason, they don't get it. And so I scrap the plan that I had for that day and I go, okay, we're doing this all over again. And I reteach it and I have to come up with an idea that connects with them in a different way because they didn't get it the first time. So I got to go back and do it again. Okay, well, that happens all the time in teaching. Materials aren't available, the kids aren't ready, something comes up where, you were going to show them a video clip of something for that day. It was going to, a 20-minute video in science class or whatever, like, and the computer's broken, the TV's broken. You can't show it. What are you going to do? Well, a smart person can come up with something on the fly. If you can't, it means you're probably not ready to be a teacher. So you've got to practice all that stuff. So that's another idea. Number 3, this might sound a little strange, but shadow excellent sports coaches. This is something that all student teachers should have to go do. I think I ended up being a good teacher for 2 key reasons. One, as I said in one of my previous episodes, my dad's a cognitive psychologist. So living with a guy who comes home every day and talks about this stuff, even with his own kids, and when he's teaching me stuff, he's using those strategies. It just sort of seeps in, even if he's not explaining it directly, explicitly. Just knowing how my dad taught me and what the proper methods for teaching are, they just kind of got in there. All right. But also, I played a million sports as a kid. So I had a million different coaches. And the way coaches coach, especially at the lowest levels, but even all the way through college, when I was a college coach, we did this stuff as well. There is a sequence, there is a methodology. You have to do things in a certain order. Once kids supposedly learn those skills, you come back to it a few days later and do it again. There's constant retrieval, constant memory. There's adaptation to different situations. That's another big thing going on right now is, the knowledge they're acquiring and the skills they're acquiring aren't transferring to other things. So did they really know it? Well, in sports, you have to do that. That happens every practice. You work on that, where you put the kids in a situation and go, okay, here's what's going on. What are you going to do? And the kids have to think through that. And then they have to perform on the court or on the field. And then you blow the whistle and go, okay, now here's the situation. Completely different. What do you do? The ball was over here at that point. Okay, what play would you run? Nope, ball's over here. There's only this many seconds left on the clock. What are you going to do? You're constantly challenging students to think through the stuff that they've been practicing and employing them in all the different situations that sports provide. So if teachers are struggling with this, you need to have them go watch coaches. I don't think coaches necessarily think through this. I think they just do this naturally. Why? Because this is, as I said 1,000 times on other podcasts, this is how you teach anyone anything. All right? You show them what to do. You demonstrate it. Since you're the expert, you show them. And then you make them copy you. And then you have them repeat it and practice it a little bit. And then you add something new to it. So they extend a little bit. And then maybe you extend something else. But then we got to go back and practice the first thing again, because the more you extend, the more you start forgetting it. So you got to remember these things. You're constantly adjusting your teaching for that sport. Well, this is what you should be doing in the classroom. And so if you're a student teacher and you don't know this process, yeah, you could learn the science of learning stuff, and that's all great. But what you could do also is go hang out with a really good football coach. Go hang out with a really good basketball coach for a month, especially at the very beginning of the season, and especially at lower levels like elementary, junior high, even early high school. Go watch them. See how they teach basic things like dribbling, like running pass patterns properly, like basic stuff for the sport, and then see how they scaffold that and they build that into running a play. Now we have a scrimmage. Now we're in a game. Now we're analyzing film footage. It all gets built upon each other. Well, sports coaches do that all the time. And yet no one talks to them about how they do what they do. I think the weird irony is, and I had this myself, where those same coaches are often pretty bad in the classroom, which is weird. Like their teaching on the field doesn't transfer to the classroom. Um, Probably it's because they just don't care as much about their history class as they do about their football team. So that's their own choice. But like, um, maybe don't go watch them in the classroom, but go watch them in their actual, environment, which is the football field, basketball court, whatever sport it is, because that there's real teaching going on there. And yet we never talk about that. It's very strange. Get teacher ed people into observing sports coaches. That'll help a lot. Yes, the science stuff is important, and this is something I talked about with my dad on my episode a couple weeks ago, um, which was, there are many students, sort of like the ladies article I shared earlier. There are many ed students who don't have background in this. They haven't had the science courses. Um, so as my dad mentioned, getting these people who are going into teaching to take more cognitive, educational, and developmental psychology classes would be really, really helpful. I think back to mine. I had a good teacher ed program. I took one ed psych class. I had my dad for it, right? So that was a little weird. But um, then you take like child growth and development, adolescent growth and development, something like that, which isn't a cognition class. That's like some biology and social stuff, and that's about it. Then you're in your pedagogy. You're in your methods classes for the rest of your time. Um, so you're not truly learning about how kids' brains work. Right? You're learning about the teaching stuff, at least you should be, but the sciencey stuff that many of these authors talk about, they're kind of right. These things should be incorporated. It should not be done by education people, however, because as we've been saying, they're not the ones, they're not smart enough to do this. You need people who are actual experts in this. So like my dad said, who's a cognitive psychologist and who teaches ed psych, developmental psych, all this stuff. Yeah, you need the psychology department or some other science folks to be doing this, but yeah, that should be integrated more into the teacher prep curriculum. Um, One or two classes over your 4 years is not enough to understand how kids' brains really learn. So that's another idea. Last thing, number 5, we need to have some way of incentivizing good teachers to stop moving on to administration, because that's what happens is sometimes, again, like I showed earlier with some statistics, or that previous lady I mentioned, like there are people who move on to administration who don't really know much about teaching. But there's also people who are very good teachers who have moved on because the money was enticing. They got sick of dealing with grading. I mean, who knows why people go into administration? As I've said 1,000 times, I will never do that. I want nothing to do with administration. I always find it weird when there are people who say over and over and over, I love teaching so much. I love the kids. I love, the classroom environment. And yet, as soon as they could, they got out of it to go be a principal or to go be a dean or a vice president of a university or something. Like, I thought you liked teaching. Was that not really truthful? You liked sitting behind a desk more? You like the money that comes with it? So that's part of what happens is, as I said on a previous episode, I have no idea why administrators make more money than teachers. They don't do more difficult. No one does a more difficult job than a teacher does in an education environment. The teacher is responsible for so many things, and yet they don't get paid nearly what administrators do. And so if someone needs help, needs more money to help raise their family and provide for their household, well, they go, well, I'm not going to make any more money doing this. Even though I love teaching, I might as well go be a school principal. Or, I'm making my lowly assistant professor salary. I might as well try to go become a dean or a vice president of something. I'll become a provost of yada yada. Like, okay, well, then where are the good teachers? So we need more good teachers to stay in the classroom. I don't know how to do that other than to make it more valuable. Um, and the easiest way to make it more valuable is stop putting people in administration. We need the best teachers to be in the classroom. So there's 5 ideas. Everyone should go teach first grade. Put students on the spot to teach on the fly. Have them practice that. Extemporaneous teaching. Have them shadow really good sports coaches. They need to take more cognitive, developmental, and educational psych classes so they can learn about kids' brains. And we need to incentivize good teachers to stay in the classroom and stop running away to administration. Those are some problems with the field of teaching and a couple solutions that I think could be tried out if people were daring enough. I just to tie up here, I wrote an article quite a long time ago about how caring isn't enough. And I said that, there are too many times I've met people who, when I ask why they have gone into teaching, or students that I taught who were preparing to be teachers. They'd be in my English class. I go, oh, what's your major? What do you want to do? I want to be a teacher. Oh, great. And they go, because I love kids. And I always think, oh, no, that's not a good reason. I've encountered too many students in my years of being a college professor who are going to go into teaching, who I thought, yeah, and I wrote this in the article. I've thought to myself, I would never want you to teach my child. You're not smart enough to be my child's teacher. I can just tell. All right. I can tell by the deep essays you write. I can tell by the way you speak. I can tell that you don't really study very hard. I can tell by your poor performance, you are not smart enough to go into this field. And yet you're going to be some kids' teacher. Some parents going to have to deal with you, and you're just not smart enough to do it. So I wrote this in an article, and one person, replied in the comments, "You're so direct with that quote. I love that." And I didn't really think anything of it. I don't say that to students. I don't tell them you're not smart enough to be a teacher. I just think it. But it happens a lot. And she's like, "Oh, you're so direct. I love that you can say that." It's like, I've been in teaching for too long. That a while back, I just started saying what I actually believe, because I've been around too many people in the world of education who either cause confusion or they cause distrust by the way they communicate. That I can tell you're not telling me the whole story. I can tell you're not being truthful. I can tell you're just trying to be nice. I can tell you're trying to be non-confrontational and kind of nibble at the edges of this conversation, and just telling me, instead of just telling me, what do you really want here? What do you believe about this thing? What should we do? Tell me straight out. Well, there's too much of that. And it happens in, again, other industries as well, but in education, because everyone's so nice and everyone, they love the kids so much. It's like, yeah, but let's speak honestly. Let's get to the truth. Let's be direct about what's really going on here. And what's really going on is, sadly, there are just too many people in the field of education who are not cut out to be educators. And we need to admit that. And we need to find the smartest people with the best pedagogical methods, with the best content knowledge, to be our teachers, and to be compensated accordingly for being for how good they are. We just don't do that in education. And like the lady's article said, we don't do this in any other field, where we just let people slide by and be bad at their jobs. And yet in education we do. Why? Oh, because they love the kids so much. They must be good at this because they care so much. Like, no, the data is clear. Many people in education they're just not intelligent enough to do this very important, culturally influential task of teaching. And so we have to admit it. And so if you think, well, I'm being too blunt, too direct, well, that's just the way that I talk about these things, because I never want there to be any confusion. I never want anyone to walk away from having a conversation with me or listening to me going, wait, what did he mean by that? How did he really feel about that? It seemed like he kind of said this, but then he contradicted himself with that. Like, I never want that. I'm going to tell you what I think. And as someone who's been in this for 25 years, who's taught at all these different levels, who's been in charge of some of these things at the university level, I think I've earned the right to have an opinion, and I'm just going to tell you what I think of it. And the truth, as far as I can tell. Am I completely accurate in all this? Well, if I'm wrong, prove it to me. Show me, give me the evidence. I'm glad to listen to it. But again, I've been doing this a long time. I've seen it with my own two eyes. And we can all see the consequences that have emerged in the culture, and how education has slipped so badly over the last couple of decades. And as someone, I care about this. I care about my field, my profession, and I want to see everyone become successful. I want to see everyone become great at this. And the way to do that is we have to have standards. We have to have standards for our students, but we also have to have high standards for our teachers. And we just don't have that. So if you disagree, let me know. I'm happy to listen, but that's it for today. Appreciate your listening.